The medical bay of the Stellaris outpost smelled like sanitized regret and broken optimism. Dr. Velix stared at the incoming casualty report with 3 of his 4 eyes. The 4th eye was checking the emergency sedative supply again for the 3rd time in as many minutes. "Please tell me that's a typo," he muttered. His translator chip rendered his whistling clicks into standard galactic with a heavy dose of exasperation. Nurse Plima quivered. Her gelatinous form had evolved on a world where the most dangerous predator was aggressive moss. "I wish I could, Doctor. The field scanner doesn't lie. Human male. Marcus Webb. Status, currently fighting." Velix's tendrils snapped upright. "The report says he has a compound fracture of the left radius, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, significant blood loss, and a concussion that would put most species into immediate unconsciousness." "Yes, and he's fighting. A Draxian razor beast, according to the field report." The doors hissed open before Plima could answer. 2 Calvarian security officers, praying mantis crossed with worried accountant, practically fell through the entrance. Between them, supported under each arm but still somehow mostly on his own feet, was the human. Marcus Webb looked like someone who had recently become intimately acquainted with a Draxian razor beast. His left arm hung at an angle that made Velix's stomachs churn. All 3 of them. Blood had soaked through his torn uniform. His face was a canvas of bruises. When he breathed, a wet, rattling sound emerged that should have been followed by immediate system failure and death. He was grinning. "Hey, Doc." Marcus's voice was rough, but it still carried that peculiar human quality Velix had learned to identify as aggressive cheerfulness in the face of doom. "Sorry about the mess. That razor beast had real personal space issues." Velix's tendrils went completely limp, a stress response. He was aware it was a stress response. He did it anyway. "Sit down." The words came out as more of a whistle shriek than he intended. "Sure thing, just, give me a second." Marcus took 2 steps toward the exam table, swayed like a tree in a moderate storm, steadied himself, then actually made it to the table and sat down on his own. Without passing out, the Calvarian officers looked at each other with their compound eyes, doing that thing Velix had learned meant they were sharing a private frequency conversation. Probably amounted to, "What in the name of the cosmic void are we looking at?" "Report," Velix demanded. He pulled up his diagnostic scanner, tried not to focus on the fact that his patient should be dead. The taller officer, Thesic, clicked his mandibles nervously. "We received a distress call from Sector 7. A razor beast had escaped from xenobiology containment. When we arrived, we found—" He gestured vaguely at Marcus. "By this, do you mean the human?" Plima asked. She was already preparing the tissue regenerator. Her tentacles were shaking so badly they looked like an interpretive dance about fear. "I mean the human standing on top of a dead razor beast, using his broken arm to wave at us, while asking if we knew any good places to get what he called a beer, and maybe some nachos." Silence. Marcus coughed, winced, then actually laughed. It was a short laugh punctuated by that horrible wet sound, but it was still recognizably laughter. "To be fair, I was really hoping the cafeteria would still be open. Fighting makes me hungry." "Fighting makes you hungry?" Velix heard his voice climbing into frequencies he normally reserved for when the medical station's coffee equivalent ran out. "You have a hole in your lung. Just a small one. There is no such thing as a small hole in a respiratory organ." "Well, it's not a big one." Velix took what humans called a deep breath. The irony was not lost on him. He activated his scanner. The holographic display bloomed to life, showing Marcus's internal systems in far too much detail. What he saw made him wish he'd chosen a different career. Something safe and relaxing, like diffusing antimatter bombs or negotiating with the Hive Collective. The damage was extensive, catastrophic even. The compound fracture had somehow not severed the major blood vessels, either a miracle or proof that human anatomy was designed by a sadist with a very specific sense of humor. The broken ribs had punctured the left lung, currently operating at perhaps 40% capacity. The concussion showed clear signs of brain swelling. There were contusions, lacerations, signs of internal bleeding. And yet the human's heart, that ridiculous 4-chambered engine, was beating steadily. His blood pressure was low but stable. His remaining lung was compensating with aggressive efficiency. The brain swelling was somehow already decreasing. As Velix watched, frozen in professional horror, the scanner showed the beginning stages of cellular repair that shouldn't have been possible without direct medical intervention. "This is impossible," Velix whispered. "What's that, Doc?" Marcus asked, trying to lean forward and then thinking better of it. "Your species is impossible. You should be dead. You should have been dead approximately 37 minutes ago based on your injury timeline. Yeah, I've been told I'm pretty hard to kill. Marcus said it like he was discussing the weather. Mild weather. The kind of weather that didn't have holes in its respiratory system. Plima had finished preparing the medical equipment. She hovered nearby, her gelatinous form quivering in what Velix recognized as extreme anxiety. Doctor, should we begin with the lung repair or the fracture stabilization? Both, simultaneously. And someone get me a full metabolic panel, because I need to understand what kind of biological war crime is keeping this creature alive. Hey, Marcus objected with surprising energy for someone who should be in shock. War crime is a bit harsh. We prefer evolutionary advantage. Velix positioned the tissue regenerator over Marcus's chest, watched as the device struggled to map the injury through the complex musculature and skeletal structure. Your species is held together by what appears to be stubbornness and a refusal to acknowledge basic biological limitations. Pretty much, yeah. The medical bay's main computer chimed, displaying the metabolic results. Velix read them, then read them again, then checked to make sure the scanner was actually functioning and not generating fictional data. Your blood has a clotting factor that is 17 times more efficient than the galactic standard. Your pain suppression system is flooding your neural pathways with enough natural chemicals to sedate a Calvarian. Your cellular regeneration has already begun repairing the fracture site. And your adrenaline levels? This can't be right. This much adrenaline should have caused cardiac arrest. Marcus shrugged with his good shoulder. Yeah, humans are kind of built different. Built wrong is more accurate. Velix began the delicate process of repairing the lung tissue. His tendrils moved with practiced precision, despite his mounting existential dread. Who designs a species that runs on controlled system failures? Hey, it works. It shouldn't work. Officer Thesic cleared his mandibles. Doctor, we should mention that during the fight, we observed the human throw the razor beast against a wall with his functioning arm. Velix's tendrils froze mid-repair. A razor beast masses approximately 300 kilograms. Yes, and he threw it quite far, actually. The other officer, Krell, chimed in, made a considerable dent in the wall. With the arm that wasn't broken. Correct. Velix returned his attention to Marcus. The human had the decency to look slightly sheepish. It was kind of in the moment, you know. The thing was trying to eat my face. So I figured, hey, let's see what happens if I just yeet it, Velix said flatly. Yeah, you know, throwing something with great force and enthusiasm. I know what yeet means. The translator chips were updated last cycle specifically because humans kept using words that made no linguistic sense. What I'm trying to understand is how. Marcus grinned again. I work out. The tissue regenerator was making progress on the lung. The torn tissue slowly knitting back together in a way that should have taken days, but was somehow happening in real time, thanks to Marcus's absurd biology. Plima had begun stabilizing the fracture, her tentacles working carefully around the jagged bone fragments. Your species doesn't just work out, Velix muttered, adjusting the regenerator settings. Your species apparently works out by fighting apex predators and then complaining about being hungry afterward. To be fair, I didn't plan on fighting it. I was just walking back from the gym when it jumped me. Walking back from the gym? Of course. Why wouldn't you exercise before fighting for your life? Hey, leg day doesn't schedule itself. Velix made a sound that the translator chip struggled with before settling on. Exasperated disgust mixed with professional concern. He'd been working on the Stellaris outpost for 6 cycles now. Ever since the Galactic Council had decided to establish joint military and research operations with humanity. He'd dealt with humans before, treated their bizarre injuries, listened to their impossible explanations, slowly come to accept that Earth was clearly a death world that had produced a species of absolute lunatics. But this was a new level. The fracture is set, Plima announced. Her voice carried that wobbling quality that suggested she was on the verge of a gelatinous breakdown. But doctor, I'm seeing something strange. The bone fragments are already beginning to fuse without the nanite assistance. Of course they are, Velix said. Because at this point, why wouldn't they? Human bones apparently just decide to repair themselves out of spite. It's actually because of the periosteum and the high calcium content, Marcus offered helpfully. And probably all the milk I drank as a kid. Milk? Yeah, you know, baby cow juice. Velix decided not to examine that particular phrase too closely. His sanity was already hanging by a thread. The lung repair was nearly complete, the tissue now pink and healthy instead of the torn, bleeding mess it had been. Velix ran another scan, checking for internal bleeding. There was some, but it was already clotting, because apparently human blood just decided when it had had enough of being outside the circulatory system and took matters into its own cellular hands. The concussion is the biggest concern now. Velix moved to examine Marcus's head. The bruising was spectacular, a rainbow of purple, blue, and yellow that suggested significant impact trauma. You need rest, complete rest. No movement, no stimulation, at least 48 hours of observation. Marcus nodded, then immediately winced. Yeah, about that. I've got a training exercise scheduled tomorrow with the new recruits. Absolutely not. Come on, Doc, it's important. We're teaching them hand-to-hand combat. You have a brain injury. A small one. There is no such thing as a small brain injury. You keep saying that about my injuries, but I'm still here. So clearly there's some wiggle room in your definitions. Velix wanted to argue, but the human had a point that made him want to scream. Marcus was still here, still conscious, still making jokes, still somehow fundamentally functional despite having enough damage to kill most species several times over. Officer Thesick shifted uncomfortably. The human has a point, Doctor. We've noticed that their recovery times are unusual. Unusual? Velix spun to face the Calvarian, his tendrils vibrating with frustration. Last week, one of them fell from a 30-meter platform and broke both legs. He was running again in 3 days. 3 days. Do you know how long it would take a Calvarian to recover from that injury? 3 months. And that's with advanced medical intervention. Yeah, humans are pretty resilient, Marcus agreed cheerfully. We kind of have to be. Earth is, well, it's not exactly what you'd call safe. That was an understatement of galactic proportions. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, barely suitable for life, and yet somehow had produced a thriving biosphere of creatures all designed to kill each other in creative ways. Humans had evolved on a planet where the weather actively tried to murder them, where the wildlife considered them a food source, where even the plants could be lethal. And they'd thrived. They'd looked at a world of constant danger and decided to domesticate some of the predators, eat some of the others, generally establish themselves as the apex predator through sheer stubbornness and the ability to throw things really, really well. I'm keeping you overnight for observation, Velix said finally, the only card he had left to play. And you will rest, that's not a request. Fine, Doc, but can someone bring me something to eat? I wasn't kidding about being hungry. I'll have the cafeteria send something. Plima volunteered, already retreating toward the communications panel as if she couldn't wait to escape. The next few hours passed in relative quiet. Velix completed the full treatment protocol, applied regenerative compounds, checked and rechecked Marcus's vitals, documented everything for what he was sure would be a medical case study that would baffle researchers for years. Marcus, for his part, ate an amount of food that would have sustained a Quillarian for a week, made several jokes about his injuries that made Velix's tendrils curl in distress, then promptly fell asleep sitting upright. He snored. Of course he snored. Velix settled into his office, pulling up the medical files on humans. He'd read them before, multiple times, but each new encounter seemed to reveal fresh horrors about their biology, redundant systems, extreme adaptability, the ability to function through injuries that would incapacitate other species, a healing factor that seemed to operate on pure determination. And the psychological profile was even worse. Humans bonded with anything. They made friends with predators. They named their weapons. They sang songs about death and disaster. They had something called extreme sports, which appeared to be activities designed solely to tempt fate. They were insane, all of them, and they were his patients. Velix looked through the window of his office at Marcus, who was sleeping peacefully despite having been on death's door less than 4 hours ago. The human's chest rose and fell steadily, that patched lung working overtime. The broken arm immobilized but already healing. Tomorrow, he'd probably try to leave. He'd probably succeed. And in a week, he'd probably be back in the gym, lifting weights that could crush a Calvarian and preparing for whatever fresh disaster the universe had in store. Because that's what humans did. They broke, they healed, they came back stronger. It was terrifying, it was impossible. It was, Velix admitted reluctantly to himself, kind of impressive. Just a little bit. He'd never tell them that, though. Their egos were already insufficiently constrained by reality. The morning shift began with what Velix had started calling the Daily Human Incident Report. Basically a list of all the ways the Deathworlders had managed to horrify the rest of the station's inhabitants in the previous 24 hours. Today's highlights included one human who had fixed a plasma conduit leak with their bare hands, suffered degree burns, and then complained about missing breakfast. Another who had apparently gone for a casual jog in the station's high-gravity training area, set to twice Earth normal. And a third who had broken up a fight between two Kravik soldiers by simply standing between them and refusing to move. The Kravik were 3 meters tall, muscled enough to crush most species. The human was a female named Riley Okonkwo who stood maybe 1.7 meters. According to her file, she enjoyed something called kickboxing and baking sourdough bread with equal enthusiasm. The Kravik had apologized to her. Velix was still trying to process that when Plima oozed into his office, quivering with what he'd learned to recognize as barely suppressed panic. "Doctor, we have a problem. Is it Marcus? Did he try to leave?" Velix was already standing, his tendrils reaching for his medical scanner. "No, he's still in the observation room, doing push-ups." "Doing what?" "Push-ups with his good arm. He says he needs to maintain his fitness routine and that the broken arm doesn't count because he still has another one." Velix made a sound that probably violated several communication protocols. "I'm going to sedate him." "That's the problem, doctor, you can't." "What do you mean I can't? I'm the chief medical officer. I can absolutely sedate an uncooperative patient." Plima's gelatinous form rippled with distress. "His metabolic rate is too high. He's processing the sedatives faster than we can administer them. I tried a standard dose an hour ago when he started doing something he called core exercises. It lasted approximately 12 minutes before he was asking for breakfast. This was a nightmare. Velix had trained for 6 years on Calaria Prime, completed advanced xenobiology studies, written a thesis on comparative respiratory systems that had been moderately well received. Nowhere in his education had anyone prepared him for patients who exercised their way through medical crisis. He found Marcus in observation room 3, indeed performing one-armed push-ups, form that suggested he'd done this many times before. The broken arm was still in its stabilization field, held carefully against his chest. The other arm worked with mechanical efficiency. 47, 48, 49, 50. Marcus collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard but grinning. New personal record for post-injury push-ups. That's not a record anyone should be proud of. Velix's tendrils were vibrating so fast they were practically humming. "You're supposed to be resting." "I am resting. I'm only doing 50 instead of my usual 200. Marcus sat up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his good hand. "Besides, I feel fine. Great, actually. Whatever you did to my lung worked like a charm. Breathing is way easier now." "Of course breathing is easier. I repaired the hole that was preventing you from breathing. And I appreciate that, Doc, I really do. But I'm good now, so I was thinking I could maybe head out, catch some breakfast, check in with my unit. You have a healing fracture, a repaired lung, and a concussion that could still result in serious complications." Marcus stood up, tested his balance, swayed slightly, steadied himself, then did a few experimental squats. "Concussion seems fine, no dizziness, no nausea, vision is clear. I've had worse." "Worse?" "Yeah, there was this time in basic training when I took a rifle butt to the head during a combat drill. Now that was a concussion. Couldn't remember my own name for like 6 hours." "This is nothing." Something inside Velix broke. Not physically, though given his current stress levels, that was probably next. It was something psychological. A fundamental acceptance that humans existed beyond normal medical parameters and that trying to treat them like reasonable patients was an exercise in futility. "Fine," he said. His voice was flat with defeat. "But you're wearing a medical monitor. You're checking in every 4 hours, and if you show any signs of complications, you come back immediately. Deal." Marcus extended his good hand for what Velix had learned was called a handshake, a peculiar human greeting involving gripping appendages and moving them up and down. Velix wrapped a tendril around Marcus's hand and completed the gesture, trying not to think about how much strength was in that grip despite the human's injuries. Marcus left at what he called a brisk walk and what Velix would have called a light jog, moving with confidence that belied the fact that he'd been at death's door yesterday. The rest of the morning proceeded with the usual stream of patients. A Salvine with digestive troubles, a Kelvoran who'd strained a wing joint, a Threxian with a minor case of scale rot, normal injuries, reasonable injuries, injuries that made sense. Then lunch happened. The station's alarm system activated with a wailing screech that made Velix drop his medical pad. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. His communicator crackled to life with Commander Xylo's voice. "Medical emergency, Cargo Bay 7. Multiple casualties, structural collapse. Medical teams respond immediately." Velix grabbed his emergency kit and ran. Plima flowed along behind him with impressive speed for someone without actual legs. They reached Cargo Bay 7 to find organized chaos. A support beam had failed, bringing down several tons of equipment and creating a disaster zone of twisted metal and scattered cargo containers. Security teams were already pulling injured personnel from the wreckage. Velix did a quick assessment. 3 Calvarians with crushed limbs, 2 Salvines with ruptured membrane sacs, 1 Threxian with a compound fracture that looked serious even by human standards. And there, in the middle of the wreckage, was Marcus. He was holding up a support beam by himself, with his good arm. The broken arm hung uselessly at his side. But somehow Marcus had positioned himself under a partially collapsed section of the ceiling and was supporting what had to be at least 500 kilograms of metal and composite material. His face was red with effort, veins standing out on his neck, muscles trembling with strain. Under the section he was holding up, 2 Quilarian engineers, trapped but alive. "Little help here would be great," Marcus called out. His voice was strained but somehow still carrying that aggressive cheerfulness. This is pretty heavy." Officer Thesic and 3 other Calvarians rushed forward with emergency support struts. It took them 90 seconds to get the equipment into place. 90 seconds during which Marcus held that impossible weight with nothing but human stubbornness and muscles that apparently didn't understand the concept of limits. When the struts were secure, Marcus stumbled backward, caught himself, then immediately turned to help the engineers crawl out from under the debris. Velix reached him just as the adrenaline was wearing off. Marcus's face went from red to pale in approximately 3 seconds. His eyes lost focus. His legs started to buckle. "Oh," he said quietly, "I think I might have overdone it." Then he collapsed. Velix caught him with his tendrils, lowered the human to the ground as gently as possible. His scanner was already out, already painting a picture that made his stomachs clench. The fracture had reopened. The lung showed signs of stress. The concussion had gotten worse. Marcus's heart rate was dangerously elevated. His blood pressure was crashing. His body temperature was spiking in a way that suggested imminent system failure. "Get me a medical pod, now." Velix's professional calm completely abandoned. "And someone tell me what happened." One of the Quilarian engineers, a young female named Kesley, stumbled over. Her tendrils were wrapped around herself in distress. "The support beam gave way. We were trapped. The human just appeared and he lifted it. He lifted it. He saved us." Of course he did, because humans apparently saw imminent structural collapse and decided it was an opportunity for heroism rather than a situation requiring self-preservation. The medical pod arrived. 4 security officers carried it, all of them looking shaken. They loaded Marcus inside with careful efficiency while Velix programmed the treatment protocols. Full cellular regeneration, emergency cardiovascular support, neural stabilization. Everything his medical bay could throw at a patient who had decided that holding up collapsing buildings was a reasonable life choice. "Will he survive?" Kesley asked, her tendrils still wrapped tight around herself. Velix looked at the human in the medical pod. Marcus's vitals were stabilizing already. That ridiculous biology kicking into emergency repair mode. His healing factor was engaging. His redundant systems were compensating. His sheer stubborn refusal to die was apparently overriding several fundamental laws of medicine. Yes, Velix realized he actually believed it. He'll survive, because humans apparently don't understand the concept of staying down. The trip back to the medical bay was tense. Velix monitored the pod's readouts obsessively, watched as Marcus's body performed medical miracles that should have been impossible. The reopened fracture was already beginning to heal. The lung damage was reversing. The concussion was slowly resolving. It took 6 hours. 6 hours for Marcus to go from critical condition to stable. 6 hours during which Velix questioned every assumption he'd ever made about biology, medicine, and the fundamental fairness of the universe. Nurse Plima stayed with him the whole time. Her gelatinous form barely moved, which for her was the equivalent of a human holding perfectly still. She kept checking the monitors, kept adjusting the regenerative compounds, kept looking at Marcus like he might stop breathing if she looked away. "He's done this before," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. 3 times, Velix replied. "That we know of, the Razor Beast, the push-ups this morning, now this. He should be dead. He should have been dead yesterday." Plima's quivering intensified. "Doctor, what are they?" Velix had been asking himself that question for 6 cycles. He still didn't have an answer that made medical sense. They're from a Class 12 Deathworld. Everything on Earth evolved to kill or be killed. The weather tries to murder them. The wildlife considers them food, even the plants are lethal. But they thrived. They domesticated the predators, ate the ones they didn't domesticate, looked at a planet designed to kill them and decided to make it their home. Velix shook his head, his tendrils limp with exhaustion. They're not just resilient, Plima, they're optimized for survival. Every system in their body is redundant. Their pain tolerance is absurd. Their healing factor, you saw the bone fragments fusing without nanites. I saw 17 times the galactic standard for clotting factor. Adrenaline levels that should cause cardiac arrest in any other species. A metabolic rate that burns through sedatives in 12 minutes. Velix gestured at the medical pod. And that's just the biology. The psychology is even worse. Worse how? They don't calculate risk the way we do. When someone is in danger, their first instinct isn't self-preservation, it's protection. Velix thought about Marcus holding up that beam, about Riley Okonkwo standing between two Kravik soldiers, about the human who fixed a plasma leak with his bare hands and then complained about missing breakfast. They help, even when it costs them, especially when it costs them. Plima was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's terrifying. Yes, but also, I know. Neither of them finished the thought. They didn't need to. Marcus opened his eyes at hour 7. First thing he said, did everyone make it out okay? Not where am I, not what happened, not even how bad is it. His first concern was for others. Velix had to pause, had to take a breath, had to remind himself that this was normal for humans, that they did this, that the galaxy had somehow produced a species whose default response to catastrophe was who else needs help. Everyone survived, Velix said quietly, thanks to you. Oh, good. Marcus tried to sit up, failed, settled back down. That's good. I was worried I wouldn't be able to hold it long enough. You held up approximately 530 kilograms of structural debris for 93 seconds while rescue teams deployed support equipment, with a broken arm, after already nearly dying 6 hours earlier. Marcus processed this information. Then, that's a new personal record. You have a personal record for holding up collapsed ceilings. No, but I'm definitely going to remember that number now. For next time. Next time, because of course there would be a next time. Because humans apparently saw catastrophic structural failure not as a near-death experience but as a benchmark. You have re-injured your arm, stressed your repaired lung to the point of near failure, worsened your concussion, and nearly died again. Velix's voice was flat, professional, carefully empty of the existential horror he was feeling. For the second time in 2 days. But everyone's okay. Yes, everyone is okay. Everyone except you, who seems determined to commit suicide through heroism. Marcus actually laughed at that. It was weak, barely more than an exhale, but still recognizably amusement. Sorry, Doc, it's kind of a human thing. Someone's in trouble, you help. Don't really think about it. You should think about it. You should think about the fact that you have injuries, that you have limits. Yeah, probably. Marcus closed his eyes, exhausted. But those engineers were trapped, so, not really a choice. And that was it. That was the fundamental difference between humans and every other species in the galaxy. Presented with danger, most species calculated risks, assessed survival chances, made rational decisions. Humans just helped. They saw someone in trouble and their first instinct wasn't self-preservation. It was protection. They'd throw themselves into danger without hesitation, fight impossible odds without concern, endure suffering without complaint, all because someone else needed help. It was stupid, it was irrational. It was, Velix admitted to himself in the quiet of the medical bay, the most remarkable thing he'd ever witnessed. The door hissed open. Commander Xylo entered. The Threxian was massive, scaled, imposing, the kind of presence that made most species instinctively step back. But he moved with careful respect as he approached Marcus's bed. How is he alive? Despite his best efforts to the contrary, Velix said. The Quilarian engineers are saying he saved their lives. Is that accurate? Unfortunately, yes. He held up a collapsing ceiling while they escaped. Then he collapsed himself, because apparently humans believe in delayed consequences. Xylo's tail swished, a gesture of approval. Velix had learned to read Threxian body language over 6 cycles. That particular swish meant something between respect and surprise. I'm putting him in for a commendation. The commander's voice was low, rumbling. What he did was beyond courageous. It was beyond stupid, Velix corrected. He had existing injuries that should have prevented him from even standing, much less performing feats of extreme strength, and yet he did it anyway. Xylo looked at Marcus. The human had drifted back to sleep, his chest rising and falling in that steady rhythm that Velix was beginning to recognize as alive despite all evidence to the contrary. That's humanity for you? The commander's tail swished again. When the Council first proposed including humans in the Joint Operations Program, many of us were skeptical. Deathworlders have a reputation: violent, unpredictable, dangerous. They are all of those things, Velix agreed. But they're also this. Xylo gestured at Marcus, at the broken arm, the healed lung, the sleeping face of someone who had held up a collapsing building to save strangers. Courage without calculation, strength used in service of others. They're the species that looks at impossible odds and says, "Not today." The commander left. Velix was alone with his unconscious patient. He ran another scan, documented the healing progress. Marcus's body was responding to treatment with efficiency that continued to baffle him. The human would probably be awake and complaining about being hungry within a few hours. He'd probably try to leave again within a day. And knowing humans, he'd probably succeed. Plima oozed back in with a data pad. "Doctor, I've compiled the reports from today's incident. The total number of lives saved by the human's intervention was 7. 7. 2 Quilarian engineers, 3 Calvarians who were in the collapse path, 2 Salvines who would have been crushed if the debris had fallen differently." Plima's gelatinous form quivered. 7 people who would have died if Marcus hadn't been there. If he hadn't ignored his injuries. If he hadn't made the stupid, irrational, completely human decision to help regardless of the cost to himself. Velix took the data pad, read the report, then read it again. 7 lives. Note in his file, Velix said slowly. That patient Marcus Webb demonstrates typical human response to crisis situations. Irrational courage. Extreme physical exertion beyond recommended parameters, complete disregard for personal safety when others are endangered. "Is that a medical assessment?" Plima asked. "No," Velix set down the data pad. "That's just what humans do." He settled into his office chair, looked out at the medical bay where his impossible patient slept. Tomorrow, Marcus would wake up. He'd probably make jokes. He'd definitely try to leave early. And eventually, inevitably, he'd end up back in the medical bay with some new impossible injury sustained while doing something heroic and stupid. Because humans were built different. They were built to endure, to persist, to survive things that should kill them and then come back for more. They were evolution's answer to a hostile universe, the species that had looked at a world trying to murder them and decided to thrive anyway. They were terrifying, they were impossible. They were, Velix thought as he began writing his daily report, probably the reason the galaxy stood a chance against whatever dangers lurked in the dark between stars. He'd never tell them that, though. Their egos were already insufficiently constrained by reality. Plima appeared in his doorway. "Doctor, the human's vitals are improving faster than projected. He may wake within the hour." "Of course he will. And the cargo bay repairs are underway. Commander Xylo has requested a full psychological evaluation of all human personnel. He wants to understand how they make decisions under pressure." "Good luck to him." Velix rubbed his tendrils, a gesture he'd picked up from humans, though he had no idea if it actually helped with stress. "The answer is probably, they don't think, they just act." "That's terrifying." "Yes," Velix looked back at Marcus. The human had shifted in his sleep, his good arm now draped across his chest. His breathing was steady, strong. The monitor showed his heart rate holding at a calm 62 beats per minute. "But I'm starting to understand why the Council approved the Joint Operations Program. Because humans are useful. Because humans are necessary." Velix stood up, walked to the window of his office. Beyond the glass, the station's daily operations continued. Calvarians going about their duties, Kelvoraians filing reports, Threxians maintaining order, all of them going about their lives as if the universe made sense. "The galaxy is dangerous, Plima, we both know that. The void between stars is full of things that would kill us if they could. And for 6 cycles, I've watched humans walk into those dangers like they were going for a casual stroll. That's not rational." "No, it's not." Velix watched a Calvarian maintenance crew pass by, their compound eyes doing that rapid scan that meant they were checking for threats. "But I'm not sure rationality is the right response to a hostile universe. Maybe the right response is what humans do. Maybe the right response is to look at impossible odds and say, 'Not today.'" Plima was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're becoming philosophical, Doctor." "I'm becoming tired." Velix turned away from the window. "But also something else. Something I don't have a medical term for. Gratitude." "Perhaps." He looked at Marcus again. The human was still sleeping, still healing, still being impossible. "Or maybe just hope." The realization that we're not alone in the dark, that there are species out there who will hold up collapsing buildings for strangers, who will fight apex predators with broken arms, who will look at certain death and say, but everyone's okay. Plima's form rippled, a sane expression of something between concern and understanding. That's very human of you, Doctor. Don't tell anyone. Velix's tendrils relaxed, not from stress, from something that felt dangerously like acceptance. I have a reputation to maintain. Marcus woke at hour 9. True to form, his first words were, "Is the cafeteria still open? I'm starving." Velix stared at him. "You were unconscious for 9 hours. Your body just finished repairing a reopened fracture, a stressed lung, and a worsened concussion. And you're thinking about food. Fighting makes me hungry, and holding up a ceiling definitely counts as fighting. I'm keeping you here for another 24 hours, minimum. You can try, Doc." Marcus sat up slowly this time, carefully but on his own. He tested his arm, winced, then flexed his fingers one by one. "But I'm telling you I feel fine, great actually, your medical tech is amazing." "My medical tech is standard, your biology is the amazing part." Velix pulled up the scanner, ran another full workup. The results were impossible. The fracture was 90% healed. The lung was at full capacity. The concussion was barely visible on the scan. "This shouldn't be possible. You should be in a regeneration tank for weeks." "Like I said, humans are pretty resilient." "You're not resilient, you're absurd." Marcus grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It wasn't meant as one." "Still taking it." Velix sighed. His tendrils did that thing where they went limp and vibrated simultaneously, a physiological impossibility that he developed specifically in response to human patients. "Fine. You can leave in 12 hours, but you're wearing a medical monitor for the next week. And if you so much as look at a collapsing building, I will sedate you myself. And I will find a sedative that works, even if I have to invent one." "Deal." Marcus extended his good hand. Velix wrapped a tendril around it, shook, tried not to think about how firm that grip was, how much strength was still there despite everything. "Hey, Doc." "Yes. Thanks for saving my life, twice." Velix paused, looked at the human, at the bruised face, the healing arm, the eyes that had seen a collapsing ceiling, and decided someone else's survival was more important than his own. "Thank you for giving me a reason to," Velix said quietly. "Now rest and stop doing push-ups." "No promises." "I know." The daily human incident report grew longer after that. Velix documented everything. The 17 times clotting factor, the adrenaline tolerance, the bone fusion without nanites, the 12-minute sedative metabolism, the 530 kilograms for 93 seconds with a broken arm. But he also documented other things. The way Marcus asked about the engineers before he asked about himself. The way Riley Okonkwo had simply stood between two Kravik soldiers until they apologized. The way the human with the plasma burns had fixed the leak with his bare hands because someone had to do it, and the safety equipment was 3 decks away. He documented all of it. And somewhere in the quiet hours of the night shift, with Marcus snoring softly in the observation room and Plima humming to herself as she organized the medical supplies, Velix found his tendrils relaxing. Not from stress, from something that felt dangerously like hope. The galaxy was dangerous. The void between stars was full of things that would kill them if they could. But humans existed. Humans who would hold up collapsing buildings for strangers, who would fight apex predators with broken arms, who would look at certain death and say, but everyone's okay. They were terrifying, they were impossible. They were, Velix admitted to himself as he watched Marcus's steady heartbeat on the monitor, probably the reason the galaxy would survive. He'd never tell them that, though. Their egos were already insufficiently constrained by reality. But as he turned off the monitor and walked past the observation room one last time, he heard Marcus shift in his sleep, heard the human murmur something that might have been, "Did everyone make it?" Even in sleep, even unconscious, even after holding up a collapsing building, and nearly dying twice in 2 days. Still asking about others, still being impossible, still being human. Velix's tendrils relaxed a little more. He walked back to his office, picked up his data pad, began writing the next day's incident report before the incidents even happened. Because they would happen, because humans existed, and because, despite everything, Velix found himself hoping they'd keep being impossible. The galaxy needed it. The medical bay of the Stellaris outpost smelled like sanitized regret and broken optimism. Dr. Velix stared at the incoming casualty report with 3 of his 4 eyes. The 4th eye was checking the emergency sedative supply again. He had a feeling he was going to need it.